Award for Leadership in Public Service from the New Orleans Bar Association, the Federal Bar Association, and the Louisiana Association of Justice. So he's a very distinguished local lawyer, but importantly for our present purposes, he's a commissioner of the Port of New Orleans. And so Walter will speak about the position, what's going to be going on with decarbonization at the port level, the Port of New Orleans. So without further ado, I'm going to begin with my presentation so that we don't fall too far behind our timetable. It should come up now. Come on, there we go. And well, we all have the same title, Decarbonization of the Shipping Industry. But as I said, my role is to speak about the overall picture, the international picture, before Mr. Young and Mr. Leger talk about implementation of these new regulations. And so my outline here is to talk about what these new regulations are, the international regulations about carbon emissions from ships. And there are two significant sets of regulations that will be taking effect in 2023. There are regulations made by the International Maritime Organization from 2023, and also from the European Union, which it will be significant for US trade, as I will explain. The IMO, for those of you who are not already aware of what it is, it's the International Maritime Organization, is a specialized agency of the United Nations. Now, these regulations are what are called performance-based regulations. I'll explain that in a moment as well. And what that means is that there are different ways in which ship owners will be able to comply with the regulations. And some of those measures will be the use of alternative fuels. There are also operational measures. I don't have a whole lot of time to talk about those, but I'll just sort of alert you to the possible different ways in which ship owners will be able to comply with these new regulations. So that's my outline describing what the new regulations are, and then I'll hand over to Mr. Young and Mr. Leger. The IMO strategy, which has been in place for several years, IMO, I remind you, International Maritime Organization, uses two different measures in the regulations that have been implemented. And those two different measures are the total quantity of greenhouse gas emissions and the carbon intensity, and those are not the same thing. And what the carbon intensity is the amount of emissions per deadweight ton mile. And for those of you who are not maritime specialists, I need to explain what a deadweight ton mile is. The deadweight tonnage of a ship is how much cargo it can carry. So it's not the weight of the ship itself, it's the quantity of cargo it can carry. And in the case of many ships, the quantity of cargo it can carry in tons is much more than the tonnage of the ship itself. And so the deadweight tonnage of the ship is how much cargo. And so the carbon intensity is how much carbon is emitted per ton of cargo that can be carried per mile that the ship travels. That's the carbon intensity. And even if the intensity of emissions decreases, the total emissions will continue to increase if there are more ships in the world. And there will have to be more ships in the world in the future. So the focus is of the regulations is on carbon intensity, because you'll not be able to reduce total emissions without reducing intensity. Why will there have to be more ships? Well, as it says down the bottom here, more than 80% of the world's trading goods is carried by sea. The world population is currently 7.8 billion people. The UN projects it will be 9.7 billion by 2050, which is a 24% increase over what it is now. Now, remarkably, I discovered this statistic when I was looking up these other statistics. In the year that I was born, now I'm coy enough to tell you, to not tell you what year it was that I was born. It was a long, long time ago. But in the year that I was born, the global population was 2.8 billion, which is only 35% of what it is now, which is fairly remarkable. The world's population has pretty much trebled in my lifetime. And if you want to look at a statistic about carbon emissions and climate change, there's one right there, the massive growth in global population, which will continue. Now, this graph shows in graphic terms, and by the way, this is produced by a Norwegian classification society called DNV. I need to give them credit for using their graph. But the benchmark year that's being used for the IMO regulations is 2008. And the green line towards the bottom is the projected emissions in keeping with the IMO's strategy. And if you look here between 2020, which of course is already in the past, and 2030, you'll see the green line is pretty much flat. And that's even though, as you can see, the projection for 2030 is a 40% reduction in emissions. And the basic point here is that even if emissions are reduced by 40%, the intensity of emissions is reduced by 40%. The quantity of emissions will remain the same because the number of ships is going to increase. And the target at the moment, although it's going to change, the target at the moment is a 50% reduction by a 50% reduction in total emissions by 2050, which will require a 70% reduction in carbon intensity by 2050. Now, that graph shows you what the IMO's strategy initially was and what the regulations were initially designed to achieve. They initially targeted 50% reduction in total emissions by 2050. But the IMO was criticized, strongly criticized actually, for not being adventurous enough, particularly after the UN climate change conference, COP26 in Glasgow. And basically that there was widespread criticism of the IMO saying that this was not far enough. This didn't go far enough. Reducing by 50% by 2050 was simply not good enough. And so to explain what MEPC is, this is the Marine Environment Protection Committee of the IMO. It met in November of last year, November 2021, and agreed basically in the light of these criticisms to revise the initial strategy to, quote, strengthen the ambition. And those new measures are being considered right now in March of 2022 and May of 2022. And they're very likely to be more far-reaching still. And they're considering, or they plan to consider, they being IMO, market-based measures, which are not presently in the strategy. So what I've just described to you, and I'm going to describe to you in a little bit more detail now, are the regulations that are at present intended to come into force in 2023, although there's a distinct possibility that they will be more far-reaching still. Because of the revision that's already going on, even though the regulations have not yet come to force. Now, to explain how the regulations are going to take legal effect, I have to explain a little bit about the International Convention, which is called MARPOL. MARPOL is the abbreviation that's used for the International Treaty, the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships. So this is an internationally binding treaty under the auspices of IMO. And Annex 6 is part of MARPOL. And Annex 6 was first introduced in 1997. It took effect first in 2005. So it came into force internationally in 2005. At the moment, 101 countries are party to Annex 6, and the IMO says that those 101 countries represent 96.75% of the world's commercial tonnage. So that's pretty much all the ships in the world, but for a few. So pretty much all of the commercial ships in the world, bar a few, are governed by Annex 6. And Annex 6, I said, came into force in 2005. It was revised in 2010. And it was initially introduced to deal with global air pollution. And so it initially just dealt with emissions of sulfur, nitrogen, and particulate matter. And the IMO abbreviation for that, as you can see, is SOx, NOx, and PM. So oxides of nitrogen, oxides of sulfur, and particulate matter. And the key thing to understand about that is that the Annex 6 has introduced this sliding downward scale of permitted emissions of SOx, NOx, and PM, designed to reduce air pollution from ships. But as the second bullet point on my screen indicates, the concern was air pollution, not global warming or climate control, because nitrogen dioxide, which is one of the major pollutants emitted by ships, nitrogen dioxide is not a greenhouse gas. And sulfur dioxide, which is also a pollutant from ships, is not a greenhouse gas, or it can have some indirect effects. But the key point is that Annex 6 was concerned with pollution, not with greenhouse gases. By the way, the limits on the SOx, NOx, and PM emissions have been significantly lowered as of 1st of January 2020. But for our present purposes, decarbonization, the important thing to understand is that the new regulations, the IMO's regulations, are being done by amendments to Annex 6. So as well as being concerned with air pollution, they will now be also concerned with carbon emissions. And just to repeat, 101 countries are party to Annex 6. These new regulations that will come into force in 2023 are performance-based regulations. This is a little sort of buzz phrase that I used previously. And it's pretty obvious what that means. Performance-based means that there are different ways of achieving the result. So the IMO's regulations effectively say, we don't care how you get there as long as you get there. And from 2023, all ships of more than 400, now GRT, this is another little shipping abbreviation here. GRT is gross registered tonnage. And the gross registered tonnage is the weight of the ship. Deadweight tonnage is the tonnage of what it can carry. 400 gross registered tons is a pretty small ship. To give you an example, many of the offshore supply vessels that are working in the Gulf of Mexico here, going out to oil and gas exploration and production in the Gulf of Mexico, those are fairly small vessels. Many of those will be more than 400 gross tons. So 400 tons is a pretty small ship, but all ships of more than 400 gross tons registered in one of those 101 countries will have to have something called an energy efficiency existing ship index, showing its carbon intensity indicator. And that's a lot of jargon and abbreviations, EEXI and CII. But the essential point here is that starting in 2023, all ships will be required to have a reduction factor for emissions, and they will be graded every year. That will be documented every year and graded A, B, C, D, and E. Obviously, like grades in university, I guess, or high school. And poor ratings will have to be corrected. And the organization or the entity that will be required to sort of oversee the correction of a poor rating will be the flag state, because that is the principal enforcer of any regulations made by the IMO. And what flag states are, again, I'm sure many of you will know this, and it's pretty obvious even if you're not a maritime lawyer. The flag state is the country in which the ship is registered. And so it will be the country in which the ship is registered that will be scrutinizing the record of carbon emissions from these ships. Now, many ships are registered in flag of convenience countries. For example, the second largest shipping register by tonnage is the Marshall Islands. The Marshall Islands, total population of the Marshall Islands is between 50 and 60,000. Obviously, the Marshall Islands, with its large fleet of registered ships, is not going to be able to do this itself. And so what many flags of convenience do is to subcontract this to large organizations called classification societies. The basic point that I'm trying to make here, though, before I hand on, is port states and ports will have the ability to take action if they think that ships, non-compliant ships, want to come into port. It will be possible for port states, i.e. the countries that the ships are visiting, and the individual ports to bar entry if ships are poorly rated. Now, right now, operators are already considering implementation measures, because the ships are going to have to be compliant by the 1st of January 2023, which is really not all that far away. And as I've mentioned, they're using a combination of technical measures, using alternative fuels, and operational measures. There's not much time, well, there's no time to talk about what those might be, but believe me, this is the hot topic of the moment in the shipping industry. Operators are scrambling to make their ships compliant, even though the regulations don't yet come into force. Now, I'll just briefly talk about the EU emission trading scheme, because this is going to apply to vessels trading into EU ports, which will obviously include ships coming to and from the United States in trade with Europe. The European Commission announced on the 14th of July 2021 that shipping would be introduced into the emissions trading system. And that is a cap and trade system, a carbon market that operates in all EU countries. And the EU's aim is to achieve climate neutrality by 2050, so getting to zero by 2050. And now that's much more far-reaching than the IMO's effort, but the IMO's first effort. And the IMO basically has been told to try harder, which it's presently contemplating doing. But I imagine certainly the environmental lawyers present will know how cap and trade works. Participating ships are given EU allowances for each ton of CO2 that's emitted. And then there's a cap and trade scheme where if you don't use all of your allowances, you can trade them. And if you're over your permitted allowance, you have to buy credits. The fines are pretty remarkable. This is 100 euros per kilogram, not per ton, 100 euros per kilogram of excess carbon dioxide emitted. And there are 1,000 kilograms in a metric ton, so that's a significant fine for excess emissions under the EU scheme that's going to be sort of phased in. And you may be interested to hear that there's a maritime financial research firm called Drury, and it has projected what the annual cost of this would be in looking at the the greenhouse gas emissions of various large shipping operators in 2020. And so Drury has said, well, what would they now have to pay to comply if they continue to emit as they did in 2020. And for Maersk, the largest ship operator in the world, a container ship operator in the world, it would cost them $407 million to comply, which is about 10% of its earnings. CMA CGM, about 280 million, Hapag-Lloyd, about 154 million. And now these are estimates for 2023, and in 2023, only 20% of emissions will be liable. It's going to go up, right? The simple point of showing you those numbers is compliance with the European Union scheme is going to cost these major operators a considerable amount of money. And so there's a lot of focus on alternative fuel sources like liquefied natural gas, ammonia, hydrogen, biofuels. The general expectation seems to be that LNG, liquefied natural gas, will be the medium-term solution, but others, it will have to be others because LNG is not carbon-free. It does emit 25 to 30% less CO2 than traditional fuels, but virtually no SOx, NOx, and PM. This is plainly going to be the medium-term solution, though. In 2019, there were only 34 ports in the world where you could buy LNG fuel. In 2021, there are 96, 55 in development. So the world is gearing up basically to provide LNG bunkers, is the word that maritime lawyers use for fuel. Port Fourchon here in Louisiana is a very significant LNG bunkering port. And the Port of New Orleans, Mr. Leger will tell us about this, I'm sure, is going to be offering LNG bunkers by the end of 2022. LNG is not the long-term solution, though, because it wouldn't be enough even to meet the initial IMO targets. And a little fact here that I'll share with you before I have to finish is the world's first ocean-going LNG-powered ship is a ship called Viking Energy. There's a picture of it there at the bottom of the screen. It's an offshore supply vessel. That's what OSV is. It was launched in 2013 as the world's first ocean-going LNG-powered working ship. It's actually going to be converted from LNG to ammonia in 2024, which is just a little symbol of the fact that LNG is not perceived to be the long-term solution. So in conclusion, before I hand over to Mr. Young to talk about what the federal government is going to be doing about all of this, I should make the point that these are not aspirational measures. These are not things like the climate accords where countries make undertakings to one another. These are concrete, legally enforceable measures that will come into force soon, that will require substantial changes in the way ships are operated. And ship operators are making decisions now about the future life of their ships. Because a ship launched this year, the average working life of a commercial ship is about 15 years. In 15 years' time, the climate of regulation is going to be very different. The initial targets for the IMO, which will probably be decreased, is a 40% reduction in intensity. That's only 8 years away. That's half the working life of a trading ship. And so ship operators, as I said, are intensely focused on this at the moment because they are going to have to comply. These are legally enforceable regulations. And everybody is wary of making the wrong choice, of betting on the wrong horse, putting a lot of capital expenditure into one method of compliance, which will not turn out to be the one adopted by the market in general. But that's all I've got time for. That's a very speedy overview of what is coming down the pike in international terms. And I now hand over to Mr. Young to talk about the position nationally. And John, I'm just about to make you a co-host so that you can share your. Actually, can you do? Oh, there you go. You are now the host. I think. Okay. I don't know whether I did that or whether Judith did that, but I think Judith did that. But over to you, John.
Okay. Thank you, Martin. Thank you for that. Well, thank you, Judith, and everyone for inviting us today. I have to say that Commissioner Bentzel is very. He wishes he could be here. He is a graduate of Tulane Law, and very much looks back fondly on his time there. And I think Judith, we had talked, and you remember him presenting, I think about a year ago. He gave a talk to the current class. Well, listen, this is all good stuff, and Martin, thanks for kind of that overview. That was fascinating. What I would like to do is give a overview on kind of the FMC a little bit, and where we stand on or where we fit into the regulatory scheme, and then go into what the federal government is or is not doing in reflection to these new incoming regs. Can everyone see this? Let me just. How's that? Good. Quickly about the FMC. For those of you who aren't aware of or unfamiliar with the FMC, we were established in 1961. We are the sister agency, the regulatory agency to MARAD, which is located in the DOT. MARAD has more of a promotional role. We are a regulatory agency. We have 5 sitting commissioners. They are Senate confirmed. They're appointed by the president. They have staggered 5-year terms, so there's never, where we're without. They're all we should always be at full force. We are small but mighty at this point. We have 128 full-time employees that are authorized. However, we are going through a major transition right now. We probably have about 115 employees at this time, but as you've probably undoubtedly read, there's a lot of interest in the FMC now. There's a lot of interest in what we do. We do investigations. I have listed here the areas that we have area reps. I'll get to that in a minute. But we are we're an independent regulatory agency that works across the country. Our main mission is to ensure competitive and reliable international ocean transportation and supply system that supports the U.S. economy and protects the public from unfair and deceptive practices. These are issues that you undoubtedly are hearing about in the news. The Hill is taking these issues up. Right now, the Senate is reforming the Ocean Reform Act for the first time since 1998. So these issues are front and center. Real quickly, we regulate ocean-borne transportation in the foreign commerce. We oversee limited antitrust regime, another hot issue that if you're not aware of it, you'll be hearing about it in the coming weeks. We investigate and rule on complaints. We help resolve disputes. And we have international trade authority to combat unfair shipping practices of foreign nations. Again, I think all these issues, not only are they, coming to fruition now in what's going on with the market and also what's going on politically, but I think as Martin pointed out, these could be future issues that we're going to deal with in terms of integrating, decarbonization of our workforce or our shipping industry. We have a Bureau of Enforcement, and not a lot of people are familiar with it unless you're in the industry. But they basically they investigate, and they not only investigate work time, practices, but they investigate practices of nations, unfair practices of nations. We are again understaffed right now with this. Our complaints are going through the roof. Some of them are legitimate, but some of them are people are just unhappy with the rise of rates. And there's again this with the Bureau of Enforcement, you take a little bit with the good and the bad. A lot of it is it's true enforcement investigating. A lot of it can be politicized, and I think that's some of what we see right now. As I mentioned earlier, these are our true investigators. These are our area reps. So New Orleans is on there. I'm not sure if I don't think we have actually somebody from New Orleans as an area rep in New Orleans. This is an area that we are looking to bolster in terms of our on-the-ground investigators. We'll probably have a few other port cities that will also be included in this list, once we get updated budget numbers. Also, I would say Chicago would be on this list as well. Commissioner Bentzel and I were in Chicago last week and visiting the rail yards. And as many of you know on the call, I mean, there is the connectivity between a port like the port complex, like the ports of LA and Long Beach and Chicago is immediate like that. I mean, basically it's on the train, it's there, vital. I want to talk about profits for a minute. And these are sliding numbers, so please don't quote me on these. These were from an older slide, but as you can see, the carriers are making incredible profits. This is unheard of. I think in the last 10 years, they didn't make any money, and now they've hit the jackpot. And I'm not trying to be pejorative or escalate it, but this is, I think, also what is going to need to be played into. Sorry about that. This is what's going to need to be playing into what Martin was talking about. They are going to have to upgrade. I mean, basically, these profits will not be there for that much longer, my opinion. Not only will the industry change or the market change, but as I think as Martin set up really well, there's new capital investments that are just around the corner. Now this is, Martin touched on most of this. I mean, in terms of what the expectations are and the investments that are going to be needed to be made. What I did want to focus on from a U.S. perspective is, it says all shipping companies have been tasked with lowering CO2 as much as possible. From an international perspective, and this is where the FMC comes in, our shipping market, our industry is 1.5%. We're tiny. So that's both good and bad. I mean, one, we probably a lot of our shippers, Matson and Crowley and smaller shippers, are already kind of moving in that direction with their fleets. But that leaves us to regulate the larger foreign carriers. We have 10 carriers that come in and service our ports. And, it's going to be very interesting to see how this is going to take place. I think the pandemic has really, depending on how you want to look at it, it's really worked well in terms of raising the visibility of the shipping industry, all warts and everything included. But people are not only going to be looking at how ports operate, how terminals operate, but as we move forward into more of a environmental and out of the pandemic and more into an environmental operations perspective, I think COVID has provided quite a launching pad for people to debate these issues and to be aware of them. These are general distribution of emissions based on maneuvers. Again, Martin has provided, great background on this, so I'll just through this. International shipping of emissions. Again, this is just a pure background, and this will be available for everyone. Judith will provide the PowerPoint. Again, Martin provided this. In terms of the alternatives. What I wanted to get to a little bit is where the ports are. And how the federal government is going to implement this. Right now, I mean, just to be perfectly blunt, the federal government wants. Oops, sorry about that. I'm a little carried away. The federal government, and specifically this administration, would like to go from 0 to 60 right now and be at zero emissions. And as Martin outlined, there's going to be some middle ground where the federal government has some nibble at the edges is cold ironing. I mean, they're starting to do that at most ports. I don't know if maybe Walter will let us know if New Orleans is starting to do that. A lot of these policies are starting to be implemented in California. And they are really going for an aggressive zero emissions policy. And I'm not exactly sure. I know it's a lot more aggressive than what IMO is proposing. But just way of background and comparison, I used to work for a member of Congress from California, referenced in my bio, in the mid 2000s, and this was happening to the truckers. You know, it was almost the exact same thing on land. They basically, you know, their trucks were outdated. They had to retrofit them. If they weren't able to, you know, to meet the standards, then the carbon standards, then they were denied access to the ports. So it'll be interesting to see how that is implemented on the water side. You know, for its part, you know, the administration is with their Build Back Better bill, their infrastructure bill, they are providing tools. I mean, they're providing some tools to, you know, at least give the landside operators, the ports, opportunities to address some of these emissions issues. Their port infrastructure development program, which is, you know, evolves every year in terms of the priority of a given administration, is highly focused on the emissions reduction and tools and strategies to reach this. So, you know, what is the next step? I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how we're going to look at it enforcing this. I keep going back to this. I mean, and I think this is where the U.S. is going to really have to figure out not only as we get out of our supply chain dilemma right now, but our industry is tiny. We're not at the table. Okay, we can't be at the table because we're only 1.5%, and this is all international. So I think, you know, it's one, frustrating, but two, it also could be a great opportunity. I would love to see, this is John Young speaking, not the commissioner, but, you know, why don't we have an innovative shipbuilding program that can, you know, address a lot of these regulations? I mean, people, if I were a carrier, certainly a U.S. carrier, somebody who was thinking about really jumping into this business for you know, not only, you know, practical purposes, you know, because we only have 1.5% of the industry, but also environmental. I mean, I'm sure we have some environmental, I'm sure we have the talent to really kind of get in there and figure out what the next generation fleet could be. So that's kind of my pitch. But going back to the FMC and what we do, you know, we're regulators, and these carriers really go through the FMC. It's our task to make sure that, you know, they are complying with their agreements. And some of it does touch on bunkering fuel, and that's in their agreements. But, you know, the FMC could be you know, a tool moving forward on how we implement and, you know, envision how these new environmental decarbonization regs are going to be implemented. The other piece I would say is that we, I'm trying to draw a parallel here, but, you know, Commissioner Bentzel and I are working on a data initiative, and every Tuesday at 3 Eastern, we take a slice of the supply chain and we have a meeting, and we basically are trying to get to a point where we're harmonizing data, and we're harmonizing definitions that are going to lead to definitions that reflect, for example, agreed upon container availability terms, for example. That's just one example. But, you know, I think that in some ways is the strength. I'm sorry, I got a typo here. I'm here, but I just noticed that. But that's kind of the strength and the tools that the FMC can provide, and I think should provide. So does that translate over to decarbonization? Maybe. I think there's a lot of tools and there's a lot of decisions that have to be made outside of our realm of authority and really great expertise. But I think, you know, regardless, we are kind of the shipping industry's touchstone here in the U.S. So it's going to be interesting to see how we move forward on that. That's it. That's my presentation. Again, thanks, Judith, for inviting us to participate.
Thanks very much, John. I think there will be time for questions at the end. But now it's over to Walter Leger. And Walter, you don't have PowerPoints, do you? So we will just see your smiling face to talk about. John has been describing to us how this may be implemented at a port level. And Commissioner Leger will tell us what's going on with the Port of New Orleans.
Yeah, Professor Davies, I'm so sorry I don't have something to block out my face, but I can put something up there if you'd like, if it'll be less distracting and helpful. But thank you. I'm very honored to be here, and particularly Mr. Young. Mr. Young and I were talking about his association in the past with Randy Christian, who's the president of the Port of New Orleans. I am Walter Leger Jr. The original Walter Leger, my dad, was a master mariner and a Mississippi River bar pilot. His father, Captain Mitchell Leger, was a captain on a troop transport on D-Day during World War II. And when we prevailed in World War II, his ship was converted to a cargo vessel, and he became a merchant marine captain and served out his career as a master mariner as well. So I have somewhat salt in my blood, but I went the wrong way and went to law school. But very proud. I was a managing director, managing editor of the Tulane Maritime Law Journal in its infancy. And by the way, Martin, I want you to know I'm a litigation lawyer. I've litigated some very intense cases against some very bad people, and we have investigators that work for our firm. It took me nothing to find out your date of birth, and I'm disappointed to say I was born before you, so the population of the world was smaller for me, and I've done the math too as to how much the population. You've really depressed me already this morning, Professor Dave. But nonetheless, I have happy things to report to you in the context of what the Port of New Orleans is doing. And by the way, I am here in my capacity as a commissioner of the Port of New Orleans, appointed by the governor of the state of Louisiana in 2020. The Port of New Orleans is 125 years old today. And its commissioners are appointed by the governor through a very elaborate and difficult process. And the New Orleans seats go through nominations of 14 mostly maritime and economic development related agencies, which produce 3 names to the governor, and the governor makes an appointment, and sometimes he makes a mistake and selects someone like me. But I couldn't be more honored, particularly in the context of my experience and the maritime industry and the importance of the Port of New Orleans to everything we do here in Louisiana. In 1699, a fellow by the name of Bentzel, who was the brother of Iberville, the two of them were among the first to basically discover and explore the Mississippi River. They had founded, I guess, Mobile and Biloxi. But in 1699, Bentzel, the younger of the brothers, was in a canoe, interestingly, which still boggles my mind when I think about it, coming down the Mississippi River, when he made a turn on the river and found that there was a British warship anchored in the Mississippi River with preparations to move upriver. Bienville pulled alongside the vessel and conversed with the captain of the vessel, Captain Cook, and convinced him that he should not go beyond that turn because the French had built forts, and they were well armed with cannon and would protect their new claim to the entire Mississippi River. The captain quickly lifted anchor and left. And hence the French, who had no ports, no guns, had not established anything on the Mississippi River, decided several years later and founded the city of New Orleans in 1718. So basically the Port of New Orleans, like many of the other old ports in the world, or at least the city of New Orleans, was founded because of its port capacity in 1718. And its importance was demonstrated by the fact that the British tried to take it in the War of 1812, even after the War of 1812 was over. in January of 1815, and future President Andrew Jackson led a ragtag group to defeat the British forces. The city of New Orleans was one of the first strategic targets of the Union forces at the beginning of World War II, and New Orleans was captured early by Union forces early in the Civil War and never really participated in the Civil War. And it was captured because, and it was considered to be a major strategic event because of the importance of the port of New Orleans as this confluence of the Mississippi River and the upper rivers and Ohio River and all of the commerce of that industry. If you've seen paintings of the 1800s of the port and photographs of the 1800s and 1900s, it's filled with steamboats and otherwise with smoke bellowing from the smokestacks. They're called steamboats, but they were really coal boats. It was really coal and wood that was flaming the steam to present power. One of my very first memories as a child was in the arms of my mother, as my mother and grandmother went to the foot of Canal Street, where the Four Seasons Hotel is now, was a wharf then. And my grandfather, who had been at sea for about 9 months, was coming up the river, and we were there to meet my grandfather. Of course, in those days, no cell phones or otherwise, so there'd been no communication for many months. But we could see the smoke from, well, at least that's my memory, and maybe it's my imagination, but we could see the smoke even before we could see the ship as it rounded Algiers Point in the Mississippi River. If you look from that very same angle straight to the southeast, you can see a 500-foot Kaiser smokestack, we called it. Kaiser Aluminum was the largest aluminum plant in the world at the time in St. Bernard, Louisiana. I lived right across the highway from there. When the smokestack's 500 feet tall, when it bellowed, when it was operating in those days and we played in the streets, we could feel raindrops, which wasn't really rain. It was some type of a liquid with some type of particulate. In fact, our parents brought our cars, and next door, by the way, was an oil refinery. Every several years, our parents brought our cars over there, and they paid them some money to go get their cars repainted because of the particulate matter and the pollution that was literally eating the paint off of automobiles. So back in those days, Professor, before you were born, we were feeling the effects of pollution without knowing what we were feeling or seeing or doing. And that, to me, it has always given great significance to watching all of those of you who are so interested in fighting the environmental war, because we just didn't know then. We know now. And I think it's a great and wonderful thing that the maritime industry, particularly because of its significant influence on the carbon footprint and on pollution in general, has taken such an aggressive stance. Now, let me now tell you what you asked me to talk about, Professor Davies, what's going on in the port of New Orleans. I was very pleased to find out, and actually, the port of New Orleans is attempting to build right now. We are the only port in Louisiana that provides container services, and we have a port almost directly toward the river from where you guys and ladies are at Tulane. On the Mississippi River is about 100 acres of container port, and on the other side of the wall is some of the most. There's the port on the riverside, and then some of the most beautiful mansions in all of New Orleans on the other side, in very close proximity. So a port, and particularly a port like New Orleans, which grew up historically, the city grew from the port, not the port to the city. Not the city to the port, but the port was there, and that's why the city grew. And so we have beautiful, wonderful neighborhoods, and we have all different diverse kinds of neighborhoods up and down the Mississippi River where the port of New Orleans is. We, in the context of trying to compete, we are on the Mississippi with other ports. we are actually attempting to build the largest container facility in the Gulf of Mexico down in St. Bernard Parish. In that context, neighbors are very concerned about building a new port down there. And so the environmental aspect is very important. Now, I'm happy to report to you, we're a little bit ahead of the curve, I think. I don't think, we don't have any real enforcement policies. Even the things we develop, like what I call, you used the term I wasn't familiar with, Mr. Young, cold ironing. We call it shore power, I guess it is. Yeah, shore power. I mean, that's something we will develop, and we've talked about developing, but there aren't ships that demand it now. We also are a cruise ship terminal. We do provide, we're a member of the Green Marine program, which is a third-party verification program and a certification program, which involves us in the production and the use of aggressive environmental programming. And I'm happy to say, since we've been a part in 2014, we've been certified every year, and we're very much ahead of the game compared to particularly other oil and gas region ports on the Gulf of Mexico, like Houston and others. And one thing that is very interesting that we're doing is we have developed an assembly line type process in the container port as a part of the Green Marine framework, where we're reducing greenhouse GHG emissions, including the mitigation of congestion of the trucks, of the drayage trucks, the trucks that carry the containers, by organizing the queuing, by making appointments for trucks so that they don't sit idle in our yard and emit pollutants. And we're moving them through, and we're being very, very successful at that. One of the things that is really that I've gotten involved in, because I think will also impact the Newport down in St. Bernard Parish, is it's a project that we've been working with local truck drivers on to upgrade their trucks to newer, cleaner burning engines through an EPA program and a program by the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality. Since 2016, we've actually produced 80 new trucks for the truck owners by grants from the federal and the state governments, which are basically incredibly environmentally more productive and sound. We intend to replace another 30 in the next year. So we will have had 100 new of these trucks that are moving containers in and out with the specific purpose of attacking greenhouse gases. And what the data has demonstrated, that this is an amazing piece of data, that we have decreased particulate matter 95%, and about 710 tons annually of CO2 emissions from these trucks. So we're particularly proud of those things. Every single, you're talking about, there are a number of things ports can do. Among them are things that we're doing. Every single container crane in the Port of New Orleans is electrified. It's electric. That in the old days, they were all diesel powered. Now that's a good thing and a bad thing. When Hurricane Ida hit, the whole city lost power. So we suddenly, if we'd had diesel engines, we could have been taking in and out cargo. And our we couldn't operate our cranes, and the generators necessary to rent it were so enormous that it was not workable. But we also have, and we're very proud of here in the Port of New Orleans, is cold storage facilities. Chicken exporting is a very big agricultural product from the state of Louisiana. We have cold storage facilities. When Hurricane Katrina hit 2005, the cold storage facilities lost operation, and there were a lot of bad things happened there in terms of rotting and destruction of product. We have developed a process. We learned, and we have generators that we brought in to keep that from happening this time. So we've been very aggressive in those things. Interestingly, we also have a similar program to the truck program, where we're helping tug owners in engine replacement. Now we think these kind of things, and I know I'm about to go over my time, or maybe I am over my time. No, I guess not. Okay, I put it on 15 minutes, Professor, my timer. So I've got a little bit more time. But we're very aggressively, we have a sustainability group of employees who are particularly, their job is to make sure, number one, we've also implemented, I mean, these are little things, but I think that they symbolically let you know that we're really aggressively trying to do our part to attack. We've created electric power plug-in stations at our employee parking lot to encourage employees to electrification of their vehicles. We're moving toward electrification and use of alternative fuels in every new vehicle owned and operated by the port itself. Not just the trucks that do dredge, but the ones that we're using otherwise. Now, with respect to Professor, you talked about the LNG issue and what the Port of New Orleans is doing. The Port of New Orleans is one of 5 ports on the Mississippi River. Port of Baton Rouge, starting north to south, Port of Baton Rouge, Port of South Louisiana, Port of New Orleans, St. Bernard Port, and the Port of Plaquemines. We try to coordinate and work together with all of the other ports. We don't really compete with each other, fortunately, but we do compete with Houston and to some degree with Mobile. But in that context, we're working, for solutions to ships that are coming here now and future ships. We don't have ships that are calling on our port that use LNG as a fuel source, but we are expecting within the context of the regulations that we will have those. What is happening is down in Plaquemines Parish, there is an LNG facility, as you pointed out, Professor, in Port Fouchon. There's an LNG facility being developed in Lake Charles on the Calcasieu River, and in Plaquemines Parish, Global Venture or Venture Global is developing an LNG production facility about 20 to 30 miles or 30 miles down below the city of New Orleans. And our jurisdiction is Jefferson Parish, Orleans Parish, St. Bernard Parish, but we are working with our partners to develop, when the time comes when we start receiving those alternative fuel vessels, and particularly expecting that, I think Professor Davies, as you pointed out, LNG will be the interim solution. It probably won't be the long-term solution, but we expect that that's where it's going right now. So we're already working with our private industry partners to provide, once that LNG facility is done in Lower Plaquemines, they'll be able to go acquire the LNG fuel and bunker to the ships alongside. And for those of you, what bunkering is when a ship like a cruise ship comes into the Port of New Orleans, they pull up to the dock, and then they acquire their cargo, people, and they unload their cargo, people, and they also acquire supplies, food, most importantly alcohol, from the shore. From the water side, we provide them with marine fuel in the form of bunkering. A barge will pull up alongside like a gas station pulling up to the car instead of the car pulling up to the gas station, and it'll load it up. What we're developing now is plans to develop bunkering in terms of LNG. We are anticipating, though, as both Mr. Young and Professor Davies pointed out, that LNG is not the solution in the future. And we're trying to anticipate, but the market, I believe, will drive this for us. And maybe your regulations and the EU's regulations will drive the market, but the market will drive for us how we deliver ammonia, how we deliver hydrogen, how we deliver maybe other biofuels that are better than what we're doing. But we are very much, and if you know our president, the port's president, Mr. Young, she's way ahead of the curve. And we're looking at the market in the future. We expect when we build this, we've purchased 1,100 acres in St. Bernard Parish. We expect that as that facility is opened and created, every environmental effort in the interest of the community, in the interest of our own, because we think we can do things with environmental fuels, environmental energy sources that will be more economical. It's hard to say this, by the way, and I say it very quietly. in the state of Louisiana, which is an oil and gas state. But we think that we can, and we can create jobs while we're doing it and be part of an economy that's doing that. Our governor's announced in the last few days his efforts to help acquire funding from some of the federal funding that's coming back to basically implement environmentally aggressive programs and climate change directed programs. And our people, our lobbyists, our staffs are already aggressively trying to engage there, not just to get money, but to actually create the product. So I think, I've been very excited that we've been very aggressive. Oh, and by the way, one other thing that you mentioned on the, I guess the cold ironing, and I call it, again, ship to shore. We are already having discussions with Energy, the power company, as to how we do that. Once the ships are capable of receiving that, we agree that, and that's another big concern the community has in St. Bernard Parish. I have, as a former resident of St. Bernard, and in effect, the governor has directed me to help. That's why he gave me this problem to help solve the problems of that community down there. And one of those, I think, are the potentials for the environmental impacts. The people there don't want ships docked with smoke coming out of their smokestacks. They don't want trucks spewing diesel refuse, and they're right. And so we're aggressively pursuing that today. And I guess we might be doing it, Professor, Mr. Young, if the world maritime community wasn't involved in decarbonization, but I don't think as aggressively. I think it's all part of an overall attitudinal thing. And while we can't require, and I think, it's interesting. I saw your suggestions that ports in California are going to be in a position to require certain efficiencies for ships to come. We can't, as a port, we can't do that, and particularly unless Houston and Mobile are on board. But it may be that the state can force us to, and the federal government can force us to. If we're all doing it in the whole market.
Yeah, I think that California, their state's always.
Well, and fortunately, as you know, our president and our executive staff comes from California.
Yeah.
So they, right. and so they, as opposed to us oil and gas people, who grew up in oil and gas, they have an aggressive attitude toward climate change and toward fighting it. And I think it's infectious. And I think we're seeing it, and all of us are being very aggressive. I was a big critic, as you noted, Professor Davies. I was one of the founders of GNO Inc. I've been involved in economic development, involved in things, and I was a big critic years ago of the Port of New Orleans for not being economically aggressive and being old-fashioned and being. But this board that's been almost everyone appointed by Governor John Bell Edwards. This senior staff is very aggressive, but also very progressive, and in a good way. And so I think we're very optimistic. I'm very proud that I was asked to speak here. I think it was influenced by, I see Abby Waga is on here, and thank you for inviting, because I really was not exposed to the environmental aspect, but this has forced me to, and it's just made me proud to be doing what we're doing. And I'm there with you, and anything you guys can offer us to help us get it done, we're open to it. So
yeah, I actually wanted to follow. You had made a great point. I think what's going to be interesting from a business and local perspective is, the ports that are more accommodating or able to, move forward. You're going to take business away from ports that aren't, have to turn people away or can't, accommodate the environmental.
Well, I mean, when you look at the marketplace, if we're ready, when these post-Panamax ships start being able to come, well, and by the way, the reason we can't take the big ships, the bigger ships post-Panamax, by the way, is those the Panamax ships were the biggest ships the Panama Canal could handle. Well, now the Panama Canal has been expanded, and they're post-Panamax ships. These ships are enormous. Abby's dad is a pilot. a ship's pilot, in the toughest ship, one of the toughest jobs of piloting in the world, Southwest Pass in the Mississippi River. My dad was a pilot. My son's a pilot. Again, I told you I went the wrong way, but to get those big ships into Southwest Pass will be quite a feat. But the thing is, those big ships are so big they can't get to our current container port because they can't get under the Mississippi River Bridge.
Yeah.
So we have no choice, but if we want to stay in the market and compete in the market, again, 1 out of 5 jobs in Louisiana are port related. If we want to do economic development from a port and international perspective, we've got to build downriver of the bridge. And then we need to be able to compete. And you know, you noted Professor Davies, I am an LSU graduate. My dad says I straightened my life out when I went to Tulane Law School, though. He was a big Tulane guy. But we want to beat Bama. We have to beat Mobile. And we're okay with beating Texas, too. We have to reclaim our position, you know, with respect to the Port of Houston and beat them. Because, by the way, and sorry for this commercial, but by the way, when you include all of our ports on the Mississippi River, we are the biggest port in the United States, the Mississippi River, in terms of tonnage, from Baton Rouge down to Port of South Louisiana, to New Orleans, to St. Bernard and the Plaquemines. We're the biggest in terms of tonnage in the whole United States. So where we need to be more competitive is in tonnage with respect to containers, and we intend to do that. We intend to do it safely and clean. There won't be smokestacks in my grandchildren's lives raining on them when they play in the streets. We'll make it safer for them.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. We've got about, I think, 5 minutes for questions, if there are any. The way this usually works on Zoom is you put them in the chat, and either Judith or I can retrieve them from there, or anybody have any? You sort of, at some speed, we've covered the international, national, and local positions. There any?
I have one question. So you, Professor Davis, you were saying that these are all like legally like binding regulations. So is it like a self-reporting process? Like, how do they know that the ships aren't being compliant?
There will be the CII will have to be recorded, and it's going to be checked by the flag states. Now, in many cases, the checking will be done by classification societies, checking on the self-recording. Now, this is something that John Young was talking about. Increasingly, with the new data technology, classification societies are now, instead of sort of coming in once a year or twice a year to check on, paper documentation on a vessel, they're getting the information fed directly from the ship to the classification society. So the future of checking on compliance will actually be should be relatively simple because of the technology. But yes, it's principally self-recording. The ship is going to have to be recording its carbon emissions. It's going to be checked by the flag state, which in many cases will mean it's going to be checked by the classification society. But they will increasingly be getting a constant feed of information, and then they will be giving them that grade.
That's interesting. I was wondering about enforcement too, and I guess will the U.S. be enforcing its requirements? I mean, will it only be in terms of entering and operate? Because we don't have many flag vessels of international consequence.
We really don't. But I mean, I guess it would be the Coast Guard, potentially, or CBP. But from a
so for the American flag fleet, it would be the Coast Guard that has to oversee the compliance, but they already subcontract, they being the Coast Guard, for the compliance with existing regulations. A lot of that is subcontracted to ABS, the American Bureau of Shipping. And of course, ABS has got lots of members and clients who are flagged in other countries. So ABS is going to be a large part of the checking of compliance, not only for the US fleet, but for other ships as well.
Are there actually going to be devices on the vessels that test the air quality?
That's exactly what's going to have to happen.
And so then they'll be able to automatically transmit.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah.
That's interesting.
That's exciting. And sorry, I had one more question, and this is for Mr. Leger. So you said like after Ida, you guys couldn't use your cranes and stuff because it's all electric powered. Were you guys scared of like any of the pushback, like to go back to diesel so that you guys could operate during that time?
Wait, say again.
So you said like after Ida, since like we all lost power,
Right.
you guys couldn't operate on the ports. So was there any like pushback trying to make sure that you guys can go back to diesel or like have a dual process?
What happened after Ida is we couldn't take the vessels in port, at least the container vessels, because we couldn't operate the cranes. And so, we were just totally shut down. There have been occasions, and I know, Professor, you were around in, I guess it was 2008, when the Tintamar and the Mel Oliver collided, diesel spill right under the Mississippi River Bridge, actually, and it shut down the port. And basically, one of the big concerns was that cruise ships diverted to Mobile, of all places, which had no cruise terminal. So people were being, sent by bus there. And so what we just do, we function, we operate, we do what we have to. I was involved on behalf of the then governor, Kathleen Blanco, well, not quite yet, but about to be, after Katrina. And we actually saw ships that were torn from the moorings and laying on the side of the levee. There weren't many ships in the harbor. Most ships try to get out into the open seas when a hurricane's coming, but a few were not so wise. So we have events of that nature that occurred. Now, if we had not lost electricity, if you remember in Ida, the main power lines, I think about 8, was it, Professor Davies? The power went into the river. That powered most of the city. It wasn't just industrial power. So that's why many of us had no power as well. If we had been operating on high carb, fuels, if we'd been operating diesel on our cranes like in the old days, we could have continued to function. But that's not a solution for the future. Energy's got to solve its problems, and I think everyone is concluding, at least what I've been reading since Professor Davies gave me this assignment, is that electrification is going to be a really big part of handling this problem and compliance in the future. Electrification of engines, electrification of operations, electrification of shore power, et cetera.
And I think that's a lot of where the federal government, funding is coming from. Like, your guys in Washington, I'm sure, are like tapping into that. A couple of those grant programs I put up on my slides are prime targets for ports.
Does anyone down here have an electric car? I have an old friend I went to high school with 100 years ago, played football, that has an electric Mustang. And I rode in it with him, and he brags about how much more powerful it is than the fuel generated automobile. So, that was honestly the first time it ever occurred to me that we really can perhaps operate ships by electrification ultimately, I guess. I guess we don't have any idea where the technology is going.
That ship that I mentioned, the ship that's presently LNG powered, the first LNG powered ship, is going to be converted to fuel cells, and those are essentially batteries charged by the fuel source. That's one of the possibilities for the future.
No, that's great. I'm glad that there wasn't any like pushback to going back to diesel. I think that's great news that we are working towards progress, and like we know that the problems lies elsewhere. Like Entergy needs to really focus, make sure that the winds don't like knock down power lines. So I'm glad that that wasn't an issue. So that's what was one of my concerns. But we have gone over, I think, all our panelists immensely, Professor Davis, Counsel John Young, and Walter Leger. Thank you guys so much. This was great. I just want to do a shout out to the Maritime Law Society for co-hosting with us. This was a joint effort. Like Jelani was able to get Commissioner Bentzel and John Young, and Abby Wog was the one who reached out to Walter Leger, and Dom was the one who had coordinated with Professor Davis. So thank you guys so much. I still have the poll running if you guys are looking for CLE credit, but we had a small group and this was incredibly informative. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Jay, please give Brandy my best. When you,
Will do. Well, sure will, John.
I miss talking to her.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, gang. Very, very honored to be with you.
Yeah.